Hey, Bobby Z, back again. So yeah, let's see if this answers your second question. There is August 13, 1967, Bonnie and Clyde, the movie comes out, and that's probably my favorite movie of all time. I didn't go see it then because I was 3 years old, but my older brother, went and saw it. I remember my mom talking about, and she didn't want him to go see it because it was considered a violent, graphic movie for the time. And but he kept wanting to go see it, and so she finally let him go see it. She was thinking like, well, he'll go see it and it'd be violent and graphic, and he'll think, oh, this is terrible, and not want to see this again. Well, you can probably figure out what happened. He went and saw it and thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Want to go see it again. I remember we used to share a room back when I was a little kid before he went off to college and all that. But he went out somewhere and got a black and white poster of Bonnie and Clyde hung up in the bedroom back then. It was Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty actually playing Bonnie and Clyde. But so I thought, wow, that's I want to go see this movie. This sounds really cool. And of course, my parents were like, hell no, so because I was little bitty, I was 3, and he was probably, I don't know, 12 or not, or 13 or so at the time. So I didn't get to see it then, but and at the time I probably wanted to see it because my older brother was into it, and you're a little kid, you follow what your brothers do, your older brothers and sisters do. I didn't know Bonnie and Clyde from Susie and Doug at that time. I didn't really know what it was. Um, I ended up seeing the movie, I think 1973 or 4, finally, when it was on TV, years after it had been in the movie theater, and came on TV late one night, a school night. And so I saw that in the TV guide and, you know, thought, man, I need to see this. So I set the alarm clock, got up at like 1 in the morning or whatever, whenever it played, watched it, and I thought, this movie's great. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. By that time, I'm 10 years old or whatever. So, and this course was in the pre-cable satellite TV days. This is back when you just had your regular antenna on the house and 6 channels of TV. And this was before VCRs and all that good stuff. So um, the movie would come on, maybe once a year or so, and I would watch it every time that I saw that it was on, and it would always be on. It seems like at 1 or 2 in the morning on a Tuesday or weekday, and I remember it became kind of a cool deal to get up at you know 1:30 and get ready to watch it, even though you knew you had to go to school the next day. And you'd watch it, and all the cool scenes in Bonnie and Clyde, the final scene with the shootout, the bank robbery scenes, and all that stuff. And inevitably there'd be a couple of kids at school the next day that did the same thing, and you'd be talking about, hey, yeah, did you see Bonnie and Clyde? Yeah, did you see that part where they and so I did that. I don't know, the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh grade, something like that, for several years there. And same thing with A Hard Day's Night and Help. I right about the time I really got into the Beatles, when I was about 8 or 9, uh, just sort of coincidence that not Hard Day's Night, Help showed up on the afternoon movie, and this was, I didn't even know all the who was who in the Beatles at this point. I knew the names, but I didn't have them all straight yet. Was that George or Paul? And I didn't have all their albums or know all their songs even. And so Help, came on, and it was like a 3 o'clock movie in the afternoon. I watched that, and man, that was the coolest thing in the world. And it was great because there were a lot of songs in that movie that I'd never. I mean, maybe I'd heard them on the radio when I was a little kid, when I was 2 or something, when they were popular, but I'd never heard, as far as I knew. I didn't have the Help album yet, and then I don't know, a time later, months or weeks or whatever, they showed A Hard Day's Night. So anyway, that sort of became something to look forward to for me. That anytime Bonnie and Clyde was playing, anytime Help or A Hard Day's Night was playing on TV, because again, I mean, there was no VCRs or video stores or uh, YouTubes or any of that stuff. So you just got to see these things when they showed up, and so it was kind of an event. Uh, and other movies too. I mean, I remember movie Willard and Ben. Used to like those things, and they would show up on TV here and there. So then, early '80s, the whole video stores and VCRs and VHS stuff comes along, and I remember at first they just had a few stores that sold VCRs. I remember when those were like really expensive, and then they went down in price later. But they had a few stores that sold VCRs, and in the stores they had some uh, just a small selection of movies that I think initially were just for sale. And video movies nowadays, you don't have VHS anymore. Really, you got DVDs, and a new DVD movie when it comes out, they're like, you know, 1995. Back then, video movies were 80, $90 to buy, and then later, after they'd been out for a few years or whatever, they would drop the price down to about $20. But so they were kind of expensive to buy. But I don't know that they had really rental stores, but just sort of these TV shops around that started selling VCRs that had been in business selling TVs and appliances forever, and they had this little selection of you know movies. So then the video stores sort of popped up all over overnight, it seems like, and they were around, just tons of them on every corner. This was before Blockbuster kind of came along and ate up all the competition. And it was kind of fun going to those video stores because each one, it seemed, they all had the big popular movies, but each one sort of had some different stuff that the other ones didn't have, and that was a lot of fun. But so this video store, Take It Home, opened, and there were several locations, and this was 83 or so. And I went there, and I thought, man, this is great because now these movies that I like, you can see them whenever you want to see them. And so I got rented Bonnie and Clyde and Hard Day's Night were the first two things I rented when I got my membership. And I got this buddy of mine that he actually had a couple of VCRs and could make copies of movies and all this, and got a couple of blank tapes, and he made me a copy of both those movies, Bonnie and Clyde and Hard Day's Night. And I thought, wow, man, that's great. I'm going to have watch these all the time or anytime I want. The thing I found out was that it was great to have them where you can watch them whenever, but I still would watch them like once a year or so, but I didn't watch them as much as I had before. And it was nice to have access whenever you wanted it, but I don't know. It's kind of like there was something was lost in the transition there, because there was something to me that was sort of I don't know, wonderful or special about them just showing up when the people that program TV channels decided to put them on. You didn't have any control over that, and so you'd want to see them and check the TV guide. I used to do that when I was a kid, check the TV guide and see what was playing that week as far as movies and stuff, and hope that something cool was going to be on. And so when you would see that Hard Day's Night or Bonnie and Clyde were going to be on Thursday, I would get all excited and look forward to it. And it was kind of a little event, I guess. And that was kind of cool in a way, which is not to say it's not great to have access to them all the time. But the funny thing is, I still have copies of Bonnie and Clyde and Hard Day's Night and a DVD now. I don't still have those old VHS tapes that they were recorded on, even though I had those up until just a few years ago. I finally just chunked them out because I don't have a VCR anymore. But and I would pull them out and watch them sometimes. But the funny thing I've noticed is that now Hard Day's Night and Bonnie and Clyde still show up on TV every once in a while, usually on what's that, TC, Turner Classic Movies channel. And when I see that, I kind of get all excited like I was back in fourth, fifth grade, and will go out of my way to watch them, you know. So, hope that answers your question. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but so your question, I guess I should have said up front, was, as I understand it, does the internet, the arrival of the internet, affect your collecting of music, and I guess anything, but specifically music? And I guess you were thinking that maybe some people just get on the VC channel to show off records just to sort of be on TV per se, or be on YouTube actually, and show off their stuff. And not that there's anything wrong with that, I guess, but um, well, I mean, to that part, no. I would say I been collecting records pretty much. Well, I kind of slowed down a little in the '90s, somewhat, but even then, I still bought stuff. It was mainly CDs in those days, but I've been collecting records steadily, and other stuff like books and movies, but records specifically since I was 8 or 9 years old. Obviously back then when I was a little kid, you don't have a lot of money, so I would just get as I could, uh, and purchases were few and far between often, because you just sort of money you got from allowance or Christmas money or whatever stuff you could get your parents to buy. And obviously when I got a job and got a little older and stuff, I sort of bought more stuff. So I've been collecting, uh, you know, 40 some years, I guess, roughly, um, pretty much nonstop. When I saw this VC videos on YouTube, I just saw people talking about their records and stuff, and I thought this would be kind of cool, or I thought these were fun to watch. And then after a while, I thought, well, hey, why don't I do it myself? And so it is fun to do, but um, I would be collecting whether YouTube or the VC or the internet existed or not. But I guess the other part of your question was, has the arrival of the internet altered your collecting habits? And I would have to say yes to that. Obviously, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. I guess it's a little bit of a two-headed Janus. But um, for one thing, when I was a kid, I would buy. We used to go to the record stores all the time, my buddies and me, and pretty much every week. A lot of times we just go in there and look around because, again, kid, you don't have a whole lot of money, but but we would buy probably an album or two a month, something like that, depending on how much money we had. And I remember John and me, a friend of mine, we used to even make lists of. I don't have the actual list anymore, but I mean, we used to list like the next 25 albums we wanted to buy, and we would kind of stick to that, so pretty much. But and so there was that aspect to it. With that being said, there were a lot of albums that I remember hearing about, just because I used to buy all the. Used to read Cream and Trouser Press and even Lousy Rolling Stone back in those days, and so there were albums that you would hear about that didn't get played on the radio that were considered classic albums. Love Forever Changes, Psychedelic, 13th Floor Elevators, Captain Beefheart, Velvet Underground, Moby Grape, a lot of this stuff that you'd hear about, but they never showed up on the radio. And I remember seeing those albums in the record stores and would be curious about them. But the thing was, being a kid and having limited funds, more often than not, I would just buy something when I had the money to buy a record. It would be like another addition to finish off my Rolling Stones collection or my Beatles collection or the Who or some band that I knew, because Beatles and the Who and the Rolling Stones, I knew them because I had some of their records, and I knew them because they showed up on the radio all the time. And whereas the Velvet Underground, I never heard them played on the radio at all, and really until years later, and regular radio, I mean, mainly XM radio, I hear them every once in a while. But so, when you're a kid and you don't have much money, it's kind of to take a chance on an album, if that makes sense, that you go out and you spend your whatever albums cost back then, about $6, and which is a lot of money when you're 12 or whatever, and the record's lousy, you just wasted money, and if it's good, you didn't. I did take chances on records though. It's not like I never did, but because I bought London Calling by the Clash, I bought some albums by the Jam and the Ramones, and they were never on the radio back then. I don't know why, but they weren't. And those were great albums, and I'm glad I bought them. But some things, and I always meant to get around to, like the Velvet Underground and stuff, I just never did till years later. So what does that have to do with your question? Is with the arrival of the internet, all of a sudden you got Amazon, where you can go look up any album and you can listen to those little 20-30 second snippets of each song on the album. And you had Napster came along where you could download stuff for free, and so all of a sudden it wasn't a question of money. And then you had YouTube a little later that came along where you can go and there's all these albums. You can just listen to certain songs. You can listen to the whole album. Which say, so if some band you've always heard of but you never heard them, King Crimson or the Grateful Dead or something. Well, back when we were kids, and a band that wasn't really played on the radio, so I mean the Beatles or Elvis or whatever, you're going to hear those songs anyway to figure out whether you like them or not, or want to look further into them. But something like King Crimson or Captain Beefheart of the Grateful Dead, they didn't get much or any radio airplay. So your only option, really, unless you knew someone else that had some of their records you could borrow, was to go buy one of their records at the record store. And it might turn out to be good, or it might turn out to be not for you. Nowadays, you can go, if I've heard of the Grateful Dead, but never really heard much of them, and I'm kind of interested to see what they're about. Well, you can go to YouTube and listen to every one of their albums front to back, and don't cost you nothing but time. So it's real easy. So you've got this embarrassment of riches, I guess. And so that's a great thing. But in another way, it's kind of like I was talking about with the movies, Hard Day's Night, Bonnie and Clyde, and all those other movies. It was more fun in a way to, I guess, take a chance on an album, or to find somebody that had some Grateful Dead records or whatever that you could listen to their records and decide. That was a little more fun than just to have total access all the time to where Genesis, whoever, whatever band, some new band you hear about, that you can just go and listen to all the stuff for free and decide whether you like it or not. And if you do, you go out and buy the record if you want. But that's a good thing. But I don't know. Seems like some of the fun was lost, because part of the fun was that taking a chance on a record every once in a while. Part of the chance was going to the record store and looking through the stacks and seeing, who the hell is this? And this looks kind of cool, this band or this album cover or something. I wonder what they're all about, if it's any good. And so, yeah, I mean, it has affected my collecting in that a lot of these old and new bands, when the internet and Napster and YouTube and Amazon, all that stuff came along, that some of these old bands I'd heard of and just never listened to, or some I hear about a new band and don't have a clue who they are, but someone says they're good. I have gone and listened to them, and a lot of times I've figured not really interested, but a lot of times I've figured, yeah, it's good stuff, and I've gone out and actually bought their records or CDs after that, so it's affected it in that way. Um, the other thing, though, that's I guess kind of a downside is when I was younger and in pre-internet days, when I would buy an album, especially when I was a kid, going back to the fact that you didn't have much money, so I'd only get a record like once a month or so, or once, maybe a couple of times a month if I was lucky. Um, Kind of tended to bring those albums home and savor the album, pour over it, play it over and over and over, get to know it front to back, and which was a good thing because a lot of times, I mean, sometimes you'd get an album and you'd play it and you'd play it several times, you'd play it several more times, and you'd finally figure out this thing just isn't for me. I don't really like it. And a lot of times you'd play it, and the first listen or two, you just were not that impressed. But you gave it a few more spins, and started to grow on you. That's happened a lot. And of course, a lot of times you played it and you loved it right off the bat. But uh, with the all the time, every time availability that we have now to basically any group or record or song, kind of tend to, me anyway, listen to something and give it a kind of a drive-by listen. And if it doesn't grab you right away, doesn't grab me right away, I sometimes say, well, I need to go back and give it another listen sometime, a few more days from now, but I rarely do. So I think there's something lost there that, when you spent your hard-earned $6 or the hard-earned money that your parents gave you for allowance or that you got for mowing lawns or birthday money or whatever on a record, whether you ultimately ended up loving it or hating it or being indifferent to it, you at least invested the time to give it a good listen, a good several listens. And now it's a little too easy to just listen to something once that someone says, hey, there's this new group, the Orange Drafts, the great stuff, you got to hear them, and you'll go on and tap them up on YouTube and listen to a couple of their songs and make up your mind, yay or nay, and move on, and not really give them the sufficient amount of time, maybe. So yeah, there's that, and of course, the internet makes it much easier to find stuff that you want to get, and that's a great thing. It's also a downside to it, I think. Um, I remember, like I said, Buddy John and I, we used to make our lists of records, and we used to search out records that were, uh, you could find the Beatles records and the Rolling Stones records, but a lot of records were hard to find, even back in the late 70s, early 80s. The Kinks albums, a lot of their 60s albums had been cut out about the time I got into them, and, a lot of them were still in print, but some of them it took some searching to find. I finally found them, but it took a while. I remember reading about the those weird John and George albums, the Wedding album, Two Virgins, Life of the Lions, Electronic Sounds, Wonderwall Music, and thinking, well, I'd like to get those. I didn't really know what they were. I mean, you've read in the book that they were weird avant-garde tape loop nonsense, but hadn't heard them, and of course they didn't play that on the radio. I didn't know that they were no longer available. This is back when I was probably 10, 11. I remember calling record stores or looking in record stores to see them and wondering why they weren't there, and calling record stores and asking them if they could order them. Someone at one of the stores finally told me that they were cut out and not available anymore. I didn't know what cut out meant at that point. Figured it out pretty quick. But I finally tracked copies of all of those down. It took, a period of several years, but it was fun, to finally, when you finally found them and tracked them down. I remember hearing about bootleg records and even Beatle and rock and roll memorabilia, but not having any idea where you could find or buy that stuff, and finally figuring out where you could. I remember going to there was a record store in Dallas called Metamorphosis Records that was around from, I guess it started in the late 60s or mid 70s, and it ran through the early 90s. And I heard about it around 77 or so. Got my dad to drive me out there one weekend. It was about seventh grade. And, he was kind of wondering, plenty of record stores in Fort Worth. Why do you need to go all the way to Dallas to go to one? And I was trying to explain to him that these are supposed to have collectible. And really wasn't too impressed with that, but he took me out there, and it was a neat store. I remember there was the couple that ran it. I guess they were a couple. I think they were husband and wife. First time I went there was about 77, and they were late 20s, early 30s. They were like old hippies. A guy had hair down to here, and the girl looked like Sunshine Susie from Woodstock or something. And then when the whole punk rock new wave thing hit by around 1980 or something, all of a sudden, he's got a mohawk and she's got shaved hair and punk rock clothes and all that. So they went from hippies to punk rockers. But anyway, I went to that store the first time. Really cool. It was in an old house in Dallas, in an old neighborhood in Dallas, and go in the store and looking for Beatles, and I go, and here's the regular Beatles albums that you always see, Sgt. Pepper, Rubber Soul. Here's some of the import albums. That's pretty cool. And then I pull out something. I'm like, wait, what the hell is this? And finally hit me that they were bootleg albums. And I thought, man, because I didn't have a clue where you went to get those things, because back then there wasn't, again, eBay and internet and all that. So, I mean, that was just blew my mind. And I walked out of there with a copy of the Budokan Live in Japan album, or the Five Nights in the Judo Arena. Walked out of there with a copy of the Christmas album. This isn't a plain white cover with a piece of paper glued to it, like a mimeographed piece of paper. And I was all excited because I'd only heard of the existence of the Beatles Christmas album like a year or so before. And I knew that it was only sent to fan club members, but I was wanting to get that. Had no clue what was on it. I mean, I read in a book altogether now. I think was the first time I saw that book, that it was Christmas messages, but I didn't know what that was. That like, were they singing songs that were never released on regular albums, or what were they doing? So I was all excited to get the Beatles Christmas album, and they play those on the radio all the time now at Christmas, but I don't remember them playing. Maybe they did back then, but I just didn't hear them. But I mean, it was just that kind of thrill of discovery and the hunt of going to a record store and finding something really cool, like French EP 45s of the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or something. Or sometimes you'd go to a store and you'd find nothing to note, but it was still fun to dig around in there. There was another place I remember, I don't know how I heard about it, but record store in Fort Worth. So I got my dad to drive me out there, and this again, I'm 12 or 13, so not old enough to drive yet. We go out, and it's in a neighborhood, and we're driving through this old Fort Worth neighborhood of these old houses built back in the 30s or whatever. We're thinking, this can't be right because there's no businesses here. There's just houses, but we get to the address, and it's an old house. Thinking, well, I mean, this can't be right. We get out, we walk up to the house, and this old guy comes walking out of the house next door. He's going, hey, you guys here look at records? And we're like, yeah, is this it? And he's, yeah. And he lets us in, and it's literally a house that's like wall to wall, shelves of records, every room, the living room, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, whatever. It's just records, boxes of records on the floor. And man, I'm about insane beside myself because I finally found there was a copy of Life, like a real copy of Life with the Lines. He had all sorts of stuff. He had all these Mexican EP Beatle 45s, and he had so I went there for years and bought stuff, and he finally, I don't know whatever happened to the place, but so that was again, what does this have to do with your question? Well, yeah, now we've got the internet, now we've got eBay and all this stuff, and you can go and pretty much anything you want, you can just click around on the computer and find it instantly, provided you've got the money to, buy it. You want a original copy of the Beatles Christmas album, you want a First State Butcher cover, you want a Can't Buy Me Love picture sleeve, you can find it. It'll cost you money to buy it, but you can find it. And that's great. And it helps, especially if you're trying to fill in your collection of someone like the Kinks or something where a lot of those old albums are out of print. I mean, they're all on CD now, but I mean, if you're looking on vinyl, as said, it is wonderful. But again, I think something lost. There was something fun about the fact that back then, if you wanted a copy of the Beatles Christmas album, putting the money question aside for a second, you couldn't just automatically find it. You had to search and search and search, and sometimes that was for years. I mean, if you could somehow talk your parents into a trip to Chicago or New York for a Beatles Fest or something, you could find one there. You could look through Goldmine. I used to buy that magazine, and there'd be stuff for sale in there. And it was fun though. I mean, I remember finding ads in the back of Cream and Rolling Stone of Beatles and rock and roll memorabilia for sale, and I would send off and get these lists, and I should have pulled some out. I still have some. And, every couple of months I'd get these lists of stuff for sale, Beatles and rock and roll stuff, from these people that sold them out in New York, California, wherever. That was a lot of fun. I used to, they had the Beatles fan club, the official one that put out the Christmas records and all that. That was what was the movie that just came out about, was it Frida Kelly? Was the secretary of the fan club. So they had that, but then when the Beatles broke up, the fan club went away, and in the early 70s and through the 70s, several people just started their own Beatle fan clubs, and they used to send out. There was Strawberry Fields Forever by Joe Pope out of Boston. There was The Right Stuff by a lady named Barb Fenwick out of, I think, Minnesota. It was with a little help from my friends out of Cincinnati, run by two women. I don't remember their names. There was the Harrison Alliance. So I used to subscribe to all those things back when I was in, grade school and middle school. And they kind of went away in the early 80s. But so every month or two, I'd get a Beatle fan magazine from those places, and that was really cool. And these were just Xerox. Yeah, some of them, content-wise, were really good to just so, and as far as quality-wise, they ran the same. I mean, most of these were just sort of Xerox stapled together newsletters and current news, and they also sold stuff too, Beatles stuff and whatnot. So there was, I miss that. That was a lot of fun, and there was that thrill of the hunt, and so it's great that, and yes, the internet has affected my buying, and that I've a lot of bands that I'd heard of but never heard, I've gone to listen to, and then found out that I discovered that I liked them and bought their stuff. And as far as things that I've always wanted, when I have the money, now I know that I can just go on there and find them somewhere, pretty much mostly anything, and that's great. But I do miss that. The days of the fanzines and the days of going through record stores and the hunt, and that you wanted a record or a bunch of records really that I would have on my wish list, that not just your Sgt. Pepper, but your things like the Wedding album or the Beatles Christmas album or Rolling Stones picture sleeves or old Beatles picture sleeves or whatever, and that it took sometimes years to track those items down. And that joy when you finally did stumble across them I went to a couple of Beatles fests, 78 and 81 in Chicago, and then just to find in those record stores that sold bootlegs or whatever, and there's just that kind of joy of discovery was a lot of fun, and that was part of the joy of collecting, which has, not the collecting's not still fun, but that's been kind of lost, I guess, because you can can find anything nowadays. So that is a lot of rambling. I hope it makes some sense. I'm thinking about, I remember John and I went to this one record. There were a lot of record stores in Fort Worth in those days, but this one we went to in particular, and this was back when we were about 12 and 13, and this one girl that worked in there, oh man, made the bread slice turn to toast. I tell you, God, she was good looking. And she was a big girl, not big girl, but big as in old. She was a lot older than us, at least 17. We had the biggest crush on her, and she never paid any attention to us, because we were little kids, but we always, there were a couple other guys that worked in the store. They were kind of, we'd see them working. We were like, oh man, the girl's not here today. But I remember one time I went and got a haircut before we went to the record store, and so went and bought my record, and John was up there with me, and she was ringing me up. She goes, "Oh, hey, you got a haircut?" I go, "Oh, yeah, yeah." I mean, I didn't even know this girl realized I existed. And she goes, "Oh, yeah, it looks good." I was like, "Oh, man." I was just walking on there. I was like, and he was all pissed because she had said something to me and not to him, and we both had a huge crush on that girl. And I was outside the store, I was telling him, "Yeah, yeah, what we're going to name our kids and all." And he was like, "Oh, shut up, shut up." Those were good times, but all right, Robert, maybe that answers your question. If anybody's still listening, if you haven't fallen asleep already, hope you have a good one.